Hello, this is Joe Folkman, and welcome to another Zenger Folkman webinar. I'm here with my colleague Joyce Palovich, and we're going to talk today about bold leadership. Several years ago, one of our friends, Kevin Wilde, came to us, and he asked me, he said, "Do you know anything about bold leaders?" And I said, "What's a bold leader?" Well, and he said, "What do you think it is?" And I said, "Well, I think it's kind of, it's people that push hard and take risks and do." And he says, "Yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, we haven't really defined it yet." And so, like we always did, we went into our database and we looked to see if we could understand a little bit about bold leaders. And we did that, and we found there was a wealth of information there. And we're going to talk about that today, give you an overview about bold leadership, and actually introduce you to a new training event we have around helping people become more bold. And Joyce, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about what is bold leadership?
The first thing that comes to my mind, Joe, when we first started talking about this was, why be bold? I mean, do I want to be bold even? That's a pretty strong term. And is that something I even see myself as? And do I want to be that? So along the way, we've started to ask other leaders in some of our sessions and workshops and so on, when you think about bold behaviors, what comes to mind? What kinds of things come up? And so we're going to show you a list of things now that typically come up in these sessions. And you can start to see here some of the things that people say. They talk about, expansive thinking and unconventional ways of thinking. So people who kind of push those boundaries. They talk about people taking risks and encouraging others to take risks. They talk about people who will speak up in a meeting or say something, and sometimes even take a position that's contrary to what other people are thinking. And sometimes in front of even senior level leaders, they're really ready to kind of put themselves out on the line a little bit. And so as we kind of collected all of these behaviors into a group, we said, well, okay, if we had to define it, how would we define it? And so here's our definition. When we're talking about bold leadership, this is what we mean. And I want to call out a few words here that, for me at any rate, really help me understand what we're talking about. So influential behaviors that push boundaries. We're talking about leaders who can influence others. Having a strong, immediate, and positive impact. So, we see some bold leaders who don't necessarily have a positive, they might have a strong impact, but not necessarily a positive impact. So we want to say bold leadership means it's strong, it's immediate, and it's positive, and it affects both people in an organization and organizational outcomes. It doesn't exist just as a personality thing. It really is driving towards good outcomes in people. And so, Joe, I guess let's go back to Kevin Wilde's question. Can you even measure it? What have we learned about how we can measure it?
Well, and that really brings up another question for me, Joyce. If you think about 50 years ago, were organizations looking for bold leadership 50 years ago?
Probably not.
I don't think so. I think they were looking for lemmings, for people to follow, people to stand in line and not shake it up and not push the boundaries. And so as you think about this whole idea of bold leadership, I think it's something that's come into its own, and it's become a real important topic for most organizations. People don't want followers. They want leaders. They want people to push boundaries. They hire you for your intelligence, not how much you can lift or just following orders blindly. I think most organizations want that. Now, if you don't, this is not a topic for your organization.
Right. But most organizations, I think one of the reasons that we're hearing this from companies that we're working with is they're recognizing that they played it safe a little bit too much, too long, and they've got to push those boundaries a little bit.
Well, and what we did is we went to our database and we said, okay, how could we measure bold leaders? And so here's the items that we found. We did a lot of analytics on this and said, well, does this separate people out? One of the items we had talked about challenging standard approaches. That seems pretty bold to me. Another one talked about creating an atmosphere of continual improvement, not being satisfied with, the standard stuff, sort of pushing beyond that and doing more. Another one talked about doing everything possible to achieve goals, so that push hard and get things done and make things happen. There's another item that talked about getting others to go beyond what they originally thought possible. So, getting people to exceed expectations, not just meet expectations. Another item then took a different gist around energizing people to take on challenging goals, sort of creating that energy in people, quickly recognizing situations where change is needed, and finally, having the courage to make needed changes. These 7 items, as we put them together as a group, they seem to create this image of people that weren't following, they weren't sort of standing still, they really pushed the boundaries. And so as we looked at that, we thought that was boldness. And it passed the sniff test for us in a lot of different ways in terms of helping us to understand that. One of the things that's been confusing to people as we talked about this topic of bold is Joyce talked about it in the definition, and she said they create positive outcomes for people. And there's some bad, bold behaviors. They all start with A, by the way. The bad, bold behaviors.
Easy to remember that way.
Right. The 3 A's: aggressive, autocratic, and arrogant.
I've known a couple of bold leaders like that, Joe. I don't know about you, but I've known some.
And you say they're bold. You look at them and you go, wow, this is really bold. But in our view, that's bad bold. And
Yep.
That's not what we're talking about here. And just to validate that, we looked at leaders who are at the 90th percentile, in the top 10% on boldness, and we isolated data on 8,000 leaders. And then we looked at some of the behaviors they demonstrated. And look how they're different from this aggressive, autocratic, and arrogant. They were skilled at getting people to stretch rather than demanding that people stretch. So they were persuasive around it, not sort of forcing people or demanding that people do it. They constructively challenged others, not demanded or forced people, but they had constructive, challenging questions for people. And then they inspired. They got people excited about things as opposed to force this kind of aggressive thing. They were willing to help people, took the time to help people understand, and they found ways to improve ideas. So as you think about it, and you have this notion of boldness and you think that's aggressive, autocratic, and arrogant, well, that's not what we're talking about when we talk about bold. We're talking about these good behaviors and this positive impact. But those 7 items that I described on the previous page really described these bold behaviors. So that's the difference there.
Yeah, and Joe, it's getting at those positive outcomes. It's getting at both people and organizational outcomes. And I think it really is important to define our terms that way so that people get what it is and what it isn't.
Well, and it makes a huge difference, because when we looked at boldness and then we looked at overall leadership effectiveness, we found that inevitably there was this incredible correlation between how bold a person was and how effective they were as a leader. And you can see the graphic right here that shows you the correlation. Leaders who were rated as bold were also rated as more effective in terms of their overall leadership effectiveness, a super strong correlation. And then the next question would be, well, what would it be like to work for a bold leader? Would you like it or would you hate it? And as you look here and look at how we, again, measured boldness in leaders, people loved it. People that worked for a leader who wasn't very bold, first to the 9th percentile, you can see that the engagement, that overall leader, the engagement they created in their direct reports, and that satisfaction with the organization, with this place to work, and their willingness to do more, and their sense of confidence that we'd accomplish our goals, was at about the 24th percentile. But again, the really bold leaders, those that were highest on their boldness, they had engagement at the 80th percentile. So there's a strong correlation there. And then we looked at your desire to leave the organization. Again, people wanted to leave leaders who weren't very bold. They didn't challenge. They kind of sat back, and you can see that only about 10% of people thought about leaving leaders that were more bold. And so that's a good indication, a positive indication. This last graph, which I think is incredibly telling, is about discretionary effort. And every person, every employee, every day, they make a decision when they come to work. Am I going to do the minimum amount possible, a little bit more than that? Or am I going to give you all my energy, all my effort? Am I going to pour every ounce of energy into my work? There's tremendous value for that, because if you have the people that do only the minimum and somebody that does 2 times the work, that's 2 times the value. Mm-hmm. And these are the people that are willing to give more. Joyce?
I'm just going to say, I'm looking at this, and one of the things that's also striking to me is, if I say, look, how great would it be if I had, if I've got 10 people reporting to me or 8 people reporting to me, if most of those people are really putting in discretionary effort, that really does change what we can accomplish. And what's striking here is if I look at the people in the top 20% of bold leadership of their profile, mm-hmm. they're really getting more than half of their people to kind of go that extra mile and do that discretionary effort. That's pretty compelling. That bold profile really has that kind of impact.
And again, when over half the group is willing to do more, it really changes the dynamic for the rest. Because it's like, well, I guess I better keep up. If it's only about 14%, it's like, well, they're an oddball. So
yeah, why should I do anything? Nobody else is.
Yeah, so you get that exception to the rule, and really this shows you this fascinating characteristic. I often talk to people and say, how many of you have a little more work to do than you can get done? And as a manager, and everybody raises their hands, how would you like some help? Well, this is a great way to get help. So
yeah,
as you look across these 3 studies, it's clear that there's a real positive impact, both in terms of your leadership effectiveness, engagement, percentage of people that think about quitting, and discretionary effort for being more bold.
One of the things that, we come up against a lot of time in our work is people say to us, well, I don't know if I'm a leader. I don't know if this applies to me because I don't have people working for me. Maybe I'm not running a line of business. Is there an impact that on me that I should be paying attention to, even if I'm not leading a team of people and needing high levels of employee commitment, some of these things we were looking at? So we were able to do another couple of studies that we want to share with everyone today. So we were able to look at a group of individuals where we had their bold leadership profile, and this is one organization. We were able to compare that to their ratings in terms of their high potentials. And so what we see here is when we look at the top 10% in terms of their bold leadership profile, 36% of those individuals were also rated as having high potential. So we can see that there is this correlation between having a high, bold leadership profile and the likelihood that you're going to be rated as somebody with high potential. You're just standing out a bit more, and people are seeing that you've got the ability to take the organization forward in positive ways.
Yeah, Joyce, when you think about, they're saying who has the capacity to really make a bigger contribution around here.
Right.
One of those
Yeah.
characteristics that really obviously stands out is, well, are they bold or are they timid? And, it's still possible, I guess. There's only a 5% chance if you're at the bottom 10% on boldness that you'll be seen as a high potential, but a lot better chance if you're in the top 10%.
Yeah, and if you think about, I mean, it kind of stands to reason, doesn't it? When you're looking at for people who can have the potential to take the organization forward, you want those people who are thinking positively. They're thinking outside the box. They're taking some risks. That's kind of what you want in your high post.
Absolutely.
The other interesting thing here is that we've got some data that says it's not just about leaders who have positions, titles, teams of people working for them. It also applies to individual contributors. We have a 360 survey that we use only with individual contributors, and you can see here, this is almost 6,000 professionals in this database. And we were able to compare their bold leadership profile and where they stood in terms of bold leadership with their managers' performance ratings on them. And this, to me, is just a real strong set of data, because it's showing us that the folks in this database who were rated in the top quartile, the top 25% of boldness, they were also in the top 20% in terms of their performance ratings. I don't know, Joe, do you see that kind of a correlation very often? That just seems so strong to me.
It's huge. And as you think about if you're in a job and you want to be rated as being a high performer, this characteristic of bold can help you a lot.
Yeah. So let's kind of summarize what we've covered here. We've looked at a lot of data, and I think we just want to, there's real simple key takeaways. One is improving your boldness will have an impact on your overall leadership effectiveness. So if you are someone who's leading groups, leading teams, is seen as a leader in the organization, this is worthwhile paying attention to. It's going to have an impact as well on your team. It's going to increase overall engagement and retention, and probably most importantly, discretionary effort. People will want to go that extra mile for you. And if you're someone who is at a stage in your career where you're thinking about you want to contribute more, you want to grow more in your career, this idea of bold leadership would be a really good place to start, because it's going to improve your career mobility chances. So we talked about all of this, and I guess, Joe, one of the interesting things that we can do because of the data that we have is we can say, well, is this true in the U.S.? Is this are there some geographical differences? And, I'm often interested in, are there gender differences, are there age differences, or level differences? So let's take us down another level of detail in terms of what we've learned about bold leadership.
Well, and so it's interesting if you look at geographies and regions of the world and look at boldness, you can see here on this chart that the U.S. has about 34% bold. The second most boldest region is Asia, which is pretty surprising to some people because they go, really? Well, it depends on where you are in Asia, because actually in China is 38% bold, okay?
Okay.
South Korea is 24%, and Hong Kong's about 15 or 16%. But if you look at Japan, where, again, culturally being bold is not being viewed positively, standing out is kind of against the norm, there's only a 6% chance of being bold. So it depends on where you are in Asia, but keep in mind that our most bold nation right now in our database is China. And you don't have to spend much time in China to discover that's really true. We see a lot of bold leadership there. Again, you can see that go down. Europe tends to have the lowest percentage bold, and again, the countries that come in our lowest percentage bold are the Netherlands, New Zealand, and Norway, with fairly low numbers. So who's bolder, men or women? Well, Here's an age-old question. And we looked at 32,000 men and 18,000 women. We measured their boldness, and it turns out men are about at the 50th percentile, but women at the 53rd percentile.
Now, is that significant, Joe? I mean,
that is highly significant.
Okay.
Partly because of our huge numbers there, but let me show you another view of that data as you look at age. And as you look at that, at a young age, men and women are about the same. They wouldn't be statistically significant. But like all our data says, that something happens when women turn 40. I don't know what that is, Joyce, but it's...
I think I've turned 40. I don't think I'm going to share that secret. I might just keep it to myself.
But men decline significantly on their boldness, and women improve, or they maintain a fairly high level of boldness. And so that difference really comes about as people age, and we see that big difference in men and women. And if you look at this across different functions, it's fascinating because some functions that tend to be male-dominated functions like research and development or information technology, IT, or facilities management, you can see that the women in those functions tend to be really much more bolder than the men. And you can also look at this graph and not look at the difference between men and women, but the functions where boldness is stronger, and you can see some of the less bold functions such as admin or clerical and HR, engineering, and some of the really bold functions like sales and customer service, which you would have guessed that salespeople would be bolder. That's part of a sales. General management is pretty bold. And so you see those differences there. Another interesting thing is to say, well, what about top management? Who's bolder as you look at those management levels? And again, what's interesting, again, by gender, is that women are bolder in top management, senior management, middle management, but not as supervisors. But you also look at the boldness scores there, and you can see that the bold scores, that supervisors tend to be a little bit bolder. That's a fascinating thing. A lot of top management appear to be very bold, but I think do you think that's just cautiousness, Joyce, as people?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're a lot more willing to try new things, perhaps, at that supervisory level. You'll take some risks that you might not take as you get into more senior levels of leadership. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? You have more permission to take risks, but you might be less likely. And maybe you've learned some things along the way too, Maybe you've learned some things that maybe don't work out so well, and so your judgment kicks in a little bit stronger. I don't know. It is interesting though, and I guess it says if you want to start somewhere in the organization with finding your bold leaders, you'll look at your supervisory level.
Well, and again, when Kevin came to us with this initial request, he was talking about the senior management where they needed those bold leaders and not that cautious go with the flow leaders. So that's And I would say when we're talking with clients about this topic and they actually have a problem, meaning they've got a need to be bolder, it usually is in those certainly middle manager ranks and senior manager ranks. That's where the pain is for a lot of organizations. And for a lot of these people, I'm not sure that they're aware that they're not perceived as extremely bold. Well, Joyce, can anybody be bold?
Oh, yeah. I guess the first question is, can you be too bold?
Yeah.
It's starting to sound like a really good thing, but, somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I've seen some bold leaders who were not as successful as what we might want to talk about. And so, we started to look at, is bold a kind of a one-dish meal, or is it better served alongside some other things? One of the interesting things we can look at is just the interplay between having sound judgment and having a bold approach. And so we do this a lot. We look at one thing in isolation and say, well, if sound judgment is a strength, but a bold approach is not one of my strengths, probability of me being an extraordinary leader is a whopping 1%. Sound judgment just in and of itself is not going to get me where I want to go. But if we say, well, what if I have boldness, but I don't have sound judgment, it's a little bit higher. Your likelihood goes up to 4%, but not a lot higher. And it raises this question, well, why does a bold leader with poor judgment have a low probability of being extraordinary? Well, duh. They probably are getting people or wanting people to go where you go, you'd be crazy to do that. No sane person would want to do that. So, Joe, tell us a little bit more about, you actually looked into this. You kind of got very curious about this. And what did you find?
We see this a lot in our data because people come to the assumption when they see that there's only a 4% chance that they say, well, wonder if the leader were less bold. Would that increase the probability of them being extraordinary? I mean, if you backed off on the boldness, would it help? And intuitively, you think it might help. But it turns out if you look at somebody who's got sound judgment, but just is above average at bold. Now, in the previous example, we looked at people at the top quartile. So if you just reduce the boldness, does it increase the probability? And the answer is no. It goes from 4% to 0.1%. So being less bold doesn't help. That doesn't help.
Yeah, it's not about ratcheting that down. It's probably more about bringing some powerful combinations together, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what we want to share now is we found three areas to kind of combine with a bold approach. One is certainly sound judgment. If you're in the top quartile, top 25% of both of those, all of a sudden the likelihood of you being an extraordinary leader comes up to 95%. That is a very powerful combination. It's not the only powerful combination. There are a couple of others that we want to share with you. One is if you can bring strategic vision and boldness together, that's a powerful combination. Likelihood of you being an extraordinary leader, top 10%, is 97%. And then the third one is relationships. I've certainly seen some leaders who I would think of are bold, but they leave people almost kind of flat on the ground in their wake because they neglect the kind of they're moving so far so fast they neglect the positive relationships. So when we see leaders who can do both relationship building well and have a bold approach, 91% likelihood of being an extraordinary leader. So we know that there are some really powerful combinations, and to summarize that, those three are sound judgment, strategic vision, positive relationships. Combining those with bold leadership is really what's going to get you into that extraordinary category. And it raises the question then, well, which ones of those would be right for me? Which ones should I focus on? How do I make sense of all of that? What does all of this tell us?
Yeah, and it really did for us as we did the research on this. We thought, let's help leaders be more bold, and that's good, again. But if you think about it, and if you think about, well, what's the message from this research telling us? If you aren't very bold and you're really reasonably skilled at some of those other skills, we'd strongly encourage you to increase your boldness. That's going to help you because, again, this ability to be bold really is very, very powerful. Now, on the other hand, let's say you're reasonably bold. You are taking risks. You're doing those things. Maybe, and it's very possible in this case, that your best approach would be to build the powerful combination, to take that boldness and accentuate it with one of those three skills, either the ability to build relationships, the ability to have more strategic vision, or to use sound judgment. And so as we've taken people through this training here, what we've done is encouraged them to sort of think about where you are in your boldness and where are you on these other skills. Now, to assess that, we've actually created a self-assessment called the Influence Preference Assessment. And what this does is it measures your preference for boldness, your preference for strategic decisions, your preference for sound judgment, and your preference for building positive relationships. And this can help you think about where you are on your boldness, where you are on these other three attributes. And we use it in the training. At the end of this webinar here, we're going to give you a link where you can actually do this self-assessment and gather some data on yourself and kind of give you a sense about where you are in terms of your boldness.
Yeah, and it really does help you understand, what do I need to lean into more? How do I get that kind of very optimum balance or powerful combination of these things?
And Joyce, you were just with a group where you did that assessment. Were people surprised with their feedback?
Yeah, they were surprised with their feedback, and some of them were not surprised so much with their individual feedback, but this was an intact team, and they were very surprised at their collective feedback.
Ah.
And we do some interesting things to make that visible so that people can kind of see. And especially, I think, for teams of folks, it gives them some real insight into where they have strengths as a team and where they might be lacking as a team in terms of being bold as a group and tackling the kinds of things they have to tackle. And yeah, sometimes people are surprised about, wow, I really thought I was bolder than that. And actually, if I tell on myself, that happened to me. I think of myself as a pretty bold person, but I realized when I took the assessment, I could probably ratchet it up a little bit.
Well, and that really leads us to the next question. How do you do that? How do you become
without being
bolder?
a jerk?
Yeah, without being a jerk. Because it's easy. Now, if you think about it, when we've asked groups of people, we said, well, okay, let's say you wanted to be more bold, what would you do? And some people said, well, be more pushy. That's nice. How about this? Be spontaneous. Oh, we're going to shift directions. We're going to go over here. Or don't ask for input. Just boldly go,
just go.
right? And the last one is do the unexpected. Well, those things actually, maybe it creates that perception of boldness, but it makes you also look like a jerk. And as you think about that, that doesn't work. Those things don't work. What we did is we explored how people can become bolder and what the process is. And to do this, we have this idea of cross-training. As you think about cross-training, the insight here is when building strengths, oftentimes the best approach is to build around them. And the example of that would be an Olympic swimmer. They become better at swimming by swimming a lot, but they also, some of them box. Oftentimes they lift weights. They'll do jiu-jitsu or other things like that. These companion behaviors, these cross-training behaviors, actually help people to swim faster. And we wondered if there was something similar to that in terms of leadership, if there were cross-training ideas, if there were ways that you could become bolder without, becoming a jerk. And so what we did is we looked at a database. This is, I believe, 50,000 people. And we found these 8 companion behaviors that help the person move from good to great. And we're going to talk about these 8 behaviors. And what we'd like you to do on the webinar, if you're one of those people that think, gosh, I'd like to be more bold, I'd like you to think about choosing 1 or 2 of these behaviors. And these, actually, we've done the research, and we know that if people can improve the companion behaviors, the competency you're trying to improve actually goes up. And we've demonstrated this. We have proof and evidence that this works. So let me talk about the first 2. The first one is drives for results. And again, nothing helps you demonstrate your boldness better than just delivering results with bringing home the bacon or the lettuce if you're a vegetarian. But, well, maybe not lettuce. Kale.
Broccoli?
Broccoli, kale, yeah.
Kale.
That's definitely the bold move there. But if you think about a timid leader, they resist taking on challenges. They kind of deliver just kind of what they have to. But bold leaders are willing to take on challenges and willing to ask the team to do more. Now, again, a great way to demonstrate boldness is to really get the results that people are asking for, and maybe to even go beyond that. And again, the insight here is if you can get others to raise the bar, invite each member of your team to propose 2 game-changing goals that would go beyond what's expected, that would do more. So, one way to become bolder, deliver results. The second way, and we'll call this first way the push, is about the pull. And the second way is to inspire others. So the first way is to push harder. The second way is to pull more. And by being inspiring, it's a different way of being more bold. And again, timid leaders are an emotional wasteland. They don't connect to people, and they don't connect people to what we're trying to do at work. But bold leaders find a way to always inspire and motivate others. They get people excited about stretching for goals. And, you know, the insight here, the developmental suggestion would be to convey your passion and commitment about the work you're doing to others. And you're the strongest force in creating a high level of engagement and commitment within your people. We did a little research on this to kind of demonstrate the impact of doing one or the other or both of these. And so we looked at boldness, and we looked at if you didn't have a strength in either inspires or drives for results, your boldness percentile would be at about the 35th percentile. But if you have a strength in results, if you're at the 75th percentile in results, your boldness percentile went up to the 68th percentile. Now, if you had a strength in inspires but not results, your boldness would go up to the 73rd percentile. But if you did both, if you were both pushing and pulling, if you did both together, it goes up to the 90th percentile, your boldness. And so our insight here about push and pull is do both. And I was talking to a new leader the other day at dinner, and he'd just become a supervisor of a group, and he says, boy, you know, I'm really good at inspiring, but I'm finding that if I don't sort of hold people accountable and remind people of their goals and then tell them, we've got to hit this number, because that's what my boss is doing to me, they're not coming through. And I gave him this research that said, really, the best leaders do both. They push hard and they pull hard. So that's our first 2 suggestions. Joyce, what's number 3?
Yeah. So number 3 is innovation. And, you know, what I love about, I really appreciate about these companion behaviors is that there are multiple ways to get to this bold approach. And so here's another one. Timid leaders kind of sit around and go, well, if it's not broke, let's not fix it. Let's just let things kind of go along. Bold leaders are almost constantly asking the question, can we do this better? Is there another way we can do this? And I would say they not only ask it of themselves, they encourage their teams to think of new ways. They don't poo-poo ideas. They allow people to kind of come up with new ways. So our insight here is ask challenging questions. Ask the question, is there a better way to do this? And get everyone thinking that way and encouraging one more idea that maybe somebody hasn't thought of. Great way to improve things and then keep moving forward boldly. What else, Joe?
Another way is to become a champion. I know so many times I'm in meetings and they ask for a volunteer. You know, I slump down in my seat.
You've already got enough to do, probably.
You know,
right?
and I think, could I become invisible here, you know? But bold leaders volunteer. They raise their hand. They take on challenging goals. They take on difficult assignments, and they're willing to do that. I mean, this one seems really obvious to me, that if you want to be bolder, then become a champion, raise your hand, do something different.
Do something. The other one, the next one is don't lose sight of the strategic perspective, and don't let those around you lose sight of it either. Somebody said to me when we were talking about strategic perspective one time, they said, have you ever worked a jigsaw puzzle? And I said, well, sure. I've, worked a lot of jigsaw puzzles. And they said, well, if you think about it, when you first start working the jigsaw puzzle, how many times do you look at the picture that's on the box to keep you on track with how you're working the puzzle and where the pieces all fit together? And, we forget sometimes when we're leading others, leading teams or parts of organizations, that we might have that strategic perspective well in our minds, but we've got to be the picture on the jigsaw puzzle box that helps people continue to see, here's where we're headed. We're working out, you've got this little piece of the puzzle, but we're working this through towards this picture that's on the front. And just kind of being relentless at looking at that picture and putting it before people all of the time.
I love that analogy, Joyce. That is brilliant. And the next one, again, and you don't have to be great at all of these, but it's the external focus. It's focusing on what's going on around us and what other people are doing. So often we get so tied up in, the frustrations, the issues, just what's going on in your organization, that you never look outside the organization and say, what's going on outside of us? What's happening in the global economy? What are other organizations doing? What are competitors doing? People that look outside their organization, they tend to be viewed as more bold. And they're bringing that information in. They're saying, look at what these people are doing. So, again, the suggestion is read, study, ask questions about what's going outside your organization. And that will help you to be bolder.
Yeah, and then the next one is kind of like an add-on to that. Communicate it. We talk about you learn new things, and you could be out there looking at the outside world, but do you assume that everybody else around you knows what's going on, or they don't need any additional information? That would be the more timid side of the equation, whereas bold leaders are actually proactive. They're looking for opportunities to communicate. They're putting themselves in the seat of the audience and saying, well, if I didn't know the whole picture, what would I need to know? What would help me? And then obviously it's not just telling, it's listening for input. It's really being that strong. Again, I kind of come back to that push-pull, but in terms of communication, I'm generous with what I know, and I'm also generous with my attention and how I really seek to get input from others, find out what they're thinking. And then I guess we just got one more, right?
Right. This last one here really talks about taking initiative. So often we do what is expected. We do what we're supposed to do. We follow orders. But bold leaders are quick to act when they see problems, they see issues, they see things happening outside of their span of control. They jump up and really respond quickly. And again, there's this great opportunity to look for opportunities beyond what is expected and do some things now, make a difference. Now, as you think about all these things, what we found in our research is you don't have to be great at all these companion behaviors to be better and to be more bold. Pick a couple, pick one. If you can make progress on any one of these, it's going to help your perception, the perception of boldness. Now, if you ask me what the easiest one would be, this will be a good test for us, Joyce. Which one is the easiest one to move? I'd pick communication. We have some good data to say that it's the most malleable behavior, and it's the easiest to change. Joyce, what would you pick? Or would you pick the same one?
I'd agree with that. I think most of the time we don't communicate prolifically, as we don't communicate as much as we should, and we don't put it in terms that are tangible and relevant for the people who are our audiences. And I think That is a one that I would say is a really good one to start with. If you want to start with something and just start doing something. Yeah. That's what you always say, Joe. Just do something.
Do something. Now, if you want to impress your boss, which one would you choose?
I know my boss, and it drives for results. Sure.
I know my boss too. But actually, we don't. That's not our boss, but it's everybody's bosses, because that's the number one, highest chosen, most important item for bosses. Is deliver, get done what you said you're going to do. That's a great one. But they're all good. They'll all work, and they'll all make a difference. So if you'd like more information on this, we're going to talk to you about that, and we'll show you what we do in the training, because we actually give you some real specific suggestions about what you can do and how you can improve these things. Here's our insight here. Now, no matter where you are in terms of your boldness, even a modest change, going from the first to the 9th percentile to the 50th, so going from sort of not very bold at all to average, really increases your leadership effectiveness substantially. So you can have a dramatic impact by even making a little difference in terms of how bold you are. I hope you enjoyed the webinar today. This topic of bold leadership has been a very interesting topic to a lot of organizations. And we talked a little bit about this self-assessment. If you'd like to get access to that and try out that self-assessment at no cost, please let us know. Let one of our reps know that you're interested in doing that, and we'll sign you up and get you a free copy of that self-assessment. Recently, we just did 4 sessions of the Bold Leadership Workshop with a company in the Midwest. They were going through a big change process, and when they thought about what they really needed to be successful, they came up with the idea that putting people through the Bold Leadership Workshop would help. At the end of the training, they said what we needed was bold leaders, and that's what walked out of the workshop. So this might encourage you to take a look at that, and we think it's a dramatically powerful product. Now, we have a free giveaway, a wonderful book called The Power of Feedback. Actually, I wrote that book. My wife gave me some powerful feedback, and I thought, oh, this is powerful. So we're going to give away 5 copies of that book. So if you can hit on that link, bit.ly/ZFAugust19, then we just ask for a little feedback on the webinar here, and just to capture that. But you'll be registered for one of those free books. It's been a delight to be with you today, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in the future. Please give us a call if you'd like more information on bold leadership.
And with that, I guess we just want to leave you with this very kind of profound statement. Doors are open to those who are bold enough to knock. And we believe very much that improving our overall bold leadership as leaders is something that is going to create opportunities for ourselves, for our team members, and for our organization. So we thank you for listening to this webinar and for being with us.